can help you maybe be a little easier on them. A lot of us move out when we're 18, and the stat is by the time you're 18, you've already spent roughly 90% of your total time on earth with your parents. So after 18, you've got about 10% left, but you have all these old stories that you're carrying around. And often we can just be very hard on our parents. So how many of us need to update the stories of our parents? How many of us could potentially see them with more empathy and see them as people by doing these interviews and learning the stories of their lives? So that was what I set out to do the book with, that as the hope. And 3 years later and thousands of writing sessions and edits, we ended up with this book. One last question before you go.
Welcome to the Löw Tide Böyz, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris. It's episode 314 of the show. We have yet again another awesome episode to kick off 2026. Joining us is pro surfer. Yeah, we have a surfer on the show.
And swimrunner.
A decent swimrunner on debut, really decent swimrunner, Kyle Thiermann. He's the author of his recent book, and we're going to talk to him all about that, all about his swimrun journey, plus what it's like to be a pro surfer. Because I should like to know. Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Like, there's different wave sizes and sort of things like that. Good to know.
Yeah, so that was a really cool conversation.
Yeah, a long time coming. We had met Kyle at Catalina, where he raced the sprint distance.
Solo sprint.
He was a recipient of the Löw Tide Böyz Gear Loaner program.
With Adam Skolnick serving as a middleman for delivery.
Yeah.
So,
there was a lot of Löw Tide Böyz synergies happening with Kyle, but awesome to have him on. And yeah, we chatted with him after Catalina, and clearly he got it. He caught the bug, and he sees why we're so stoked on it for sure.
Yeah, so this is an awesome conversation. His book is called One Last Question Before You Go. It's like half memoir, half, if you're a podcaster or interested in podcasting, it's certainly interesting. And also just, how to interview your parents, which is kind of an interesting thing. So we talked to him all about that. But before we get to that conversation, Chipper, we have some announcements.
We do.
Should we call this show business? Did we bring that?
We haven't done show business in a while.
Time for some show
business. First up, we have, obviously, we're huge fans of Frank Paddle. We've been using Frank paddles for 5+ years now. And if you remember last year, we had the opportunity to work hand in hand with Mr. Frank Paddle himself, Frederic. And we designed some custom Löw Tide Böyz signature edition paddles, which is still takes my mind a little bit of processing to actually say that is a thing. And when we go to races, people have these paddles and they want us to sign them and all sorts of other craziness. But they've also been hard to come by, since Frederic literally makes them in his garage, very similar to how we do the podcast. But he's making them, these are artisanal items. He's making them by hand, and he has
just like our podcast, made by hand.
Absolutely. So he has a new batch ready to go. So head on over to frankpaddle.com to get your pre-orders in. This is the version 2. So there are a few tweaks and enhancements that were made. Most notably are the graphics or stickers on the bottoms of the paddles. Those are optional. You can add them later if you want, or you can keep them as is. Other than that, everything remains the same. The shape is the same, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, every time I see them in the wild from a team that I might not know who they are, it just blows my mind.
I mean, it's really
it's the
cool.
Coolest thing in the world.
These are the only paddles. They're really good paddles. They're the only ones that we've been using. They're sturdy as hell. I mean, we literally still have the same original pair that Frederic sent.
I'm using the prototypes. I never went to the published edition, the release edition, because the prototypes were awesome. So
we have them as decoration now. They we're so rich in carbon fiber around here. But you can head over to frankpaddle.com and secure those as well. We also get questions, I was thinking about this or that, or kind of customize. Frank will do a total custom set for you as well. If you have a certain design or shape or size or color that you want, he aims to please.
You want some garbage lid size ones, he's got you.
He can make you trash can lids if you want there.
In other announcements, Attila USA races are all open for registration, and we're currently in the early bird phase. That ends, I believe, at time of airing, a couple days later. So if you were thinking about signing up for a race, now is the cheapest time of the year to do so. Time for our, semi-annual, probably more than that,
PSA.
PSA.
Yeah.
You have to support your local races. A lot of these races are crowdfunded by our registration. So, the earlier we sign up, the better to guarantee that these events continue. So sign up early, sign up often, get your friends to sign up. This really helps Attila believe in the race. So if we don't want races to disappear, looking at you, Colorado, people are going to have to sign up for it and show up. So, signing up early and committing to it. Plus, they're all awesome races. There isn't one race on the schedule that we wouldn't absolutely recommend and attend in a drop of a hat.
No stinkers on the race
no duds.
calendar for sure. And prices are, again, the lowest that they'll be. I think the cheapest experience solo starts around less than $100. And then a Team World Series is around $320 right now. But that will almost double in cost if you wait till the last day. So if you're looking to save some of that extra money you save by registering, you can get some Frank paddles. Basically, they're free. It's basically that's like swim runner math, dude.
That's swim runner math. That's
they're basically
for
free
sure.
paddles.
Absolutely.
You sign up for the early race and you get on with it.
Way to reframe that.
That's whatever mental gymnastics are required. I'm here to help.
That's awesome.
Training update now. So we're in 2026. We're into January. We've seen all the folks in the Löw Tide Böyz Strava Club get out doing their first runs, rides, swims, hikes, walks, whatever you're doing on Strava. We see you over in the Löw Tide Böyz Strava Club. So if you're not in there yet, jump into that. But training update is underway. Coach Liz, she's like, you're back at it. I'm, back at the pool. I was at the pool swimming right next to Chris. He didn't even know.
Yep.
I was you were so locked in and maybe
I think
the chlorine
particularly trying to get over with and my reality for folks who listen to the show already know this, but my reality is like I turn into Cinderella like at 6:20 because that's how long it takes me to get home. Because if I don't leave by then I'm sort of delaying our early morning routines as they need to be for the moment.
Very heads down.
Yeah. So, so I'm just trying to get it done. Plus there was like too much chlorine in the water again. So it's kind of like
there was a lot of chlorine.
I wasn't trying to do anything other than just
getting more exposure
on my form goggles.
Yeah, you were dialed in there.
Which also kind of contributes to that. Like when I'm just like in my own eye the whole time,
looking
like I'm not even paying attention to anybody around. And apparently you were in the lane next to me.
I was right.
And I didn't know this. I realized this when I went back into the men's locker room and I saw a pimp dry robe that says Attila Swimrun World Champs on it. I mean, come on. There's only one other person other than myself who has one of those in the Bay Area.
That's
probably
true.
in the West Coast. And it's, this gentleman right next to me.
Yeah. So I've been hitting back on the strength routine out here in the garage where, in the studio, rather, we can see some of the equipment here getting out there and getting the strength back because that was something that really I felt was paying dividends for me in the last season. It's certainly something to continue. And it's just good for life to be stronger and resilient.
I think a theme for both of us for this year is going to be not neglecting strength.
Yes. And you've been extremely diligent with core routine. And we've both kind of taken this mindset with our training over the past year plus. It's like, literally, even if it's a 5-minute little core ab workout on YouTube or a 5-minute stretch while you're watching TV, it's a net positive for your situation. And kind of with that mindset has been really helpful on like, I don't have time to go do 45 minutes in the gym or whatever. Hey, go out in the garage, do some air squats, do some sit-ups, do some lunges, kind of stuff. It's all additive and it's all positive. Yeah. So that's the kind of mindset and thinking from the extracurriculars beyond just the run and swim.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So still in base building phase, still just trying to get consistent, stacking the
bricks,
volume,
getting those bricks.
I surprised myself by putting a 30-mile run week last week, which that was pretty good. I was
at 18.
Surprised with that. Nice.
I was like, I almost hit 20
30K. There you go.
30K
miles, 30K. Still in the 30s. So yeah, ramping that up and following a training plan. And I have my running consultant coach, Mario, my dear friend Mario Fraioli. So fan of the show, frequent guest. It feels good to have him in my corner for sure.
Definitely, for sure.
So looking forward to kind of taking that. It's not super serious, but I want to go in there feeling pretty fit. It's kind of the goal.
To the London Marathon in the spring there. Yeah,
in April.
A race Attila World Champs,
absolutely.
But you're allowed to have some A- races or a B+ race in there. And yeah, I mean, the marathon it's a thing.
It's a thing, and that one's going to be super cool. And
yeah, that'll be awesome.
It's going to be an awesome trip. So I'm stoked on it.
Cool. Well, should we surf our? That was
nice.
too.
Nice.
That was bad. We should. What's another surfing term?
Time to catch our set.
Yeah, let's catch the main set here with our chat with Kyle, professional surfer, Patagonia sponsored athlete for the last 15 plus years, author,
published podcaster,
a little bit of everything. This guy.
Yeah, really cool dude. Renaissance man for sure.
Definitely a Renaissance man, and swim runner for certain, who he did not rule out doing another swim run. So I think we got it with him.
It'll be an easy arm twist.
I agree with that. So yeah, without any further ado, let's hang 10 and flip it on over to our conversation with Kyle. You see you shaking your head. Over now.
All right, super stoked. Welcome to the show. Kyle Thiermann, professional surfer, friend of the show, swim runner, ultra runner. How you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. Happy to be here.
Yeah, stoked to have you. So you and I go back a little ways at this point. We were connected by a mutual friend of the show, Adam Skolnick. When you were prepping for Attila Catalina, the sprint, you had a bunch of questions, and Adam was like, you should probably talk to my boy Chris over here. And I was happy to, and you had an awesome race. So I think, like, let's start with, you're a pro surfer. You're obviously like a fit guy doing a bunch of stuff. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of, sort of the resume on your athletic and sort of endurance background?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started, couldn't sit still as a kid. That was probably the earliest moment. If most parents would have put me on Ritalin, my mom put me on a trampoline, which I just spent hours and hours jumping on and, learning the backflips and the misty flips and all that kind of stuff. So I just, from a very young age, had a lot of energy that I needed to get out. And from as early as I can remember, moving was how I would think. Moving was how I would get out of bad moods. Moving was how I developed my earliest friend groups, first on a trampoline, then on a skateboard half pipe. I got really into skating early and was quite good at it, like sponsored at 11 and wanted to be a pro skater. My mom then moved, my parents split up and my mom moved to the beach real close to this well-known wave called Steamer Lane in Santa Cruz. And around that age, you pick up sports because the friends are doing it. It's a very social activity. So I picked up surfing at 11, still skate, and was skating through my teens, but very quickly became much more focused on surfing. And for people who don't know, I mean, Santa Cruz is a mecca for that sport. Really, it's topographically unique in that it's a bay and there's just wave after wave after wave after wave. And it's very normal to become a pretty high level surfer in that town. There are a lot of chiropractors and teachers and firefighters that are like right on that cusp of professional level just because the waves are so good there. I was breathing in surfing, doing it before school, doing it after school. And that was really how I made friends and how I got my energy out from teens onward. And then after high school, I got sponsored first by Oakley, then O'Neill. There was a point when I was developing more of an interest in journalism and travel journalism, and more particularly environmental travel journalism. So I thought, well, what are the companies that might want to support me to travel around the world and do these environmental stories, through the lens of surfing? And actually reached out to the founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard. Had a friend of a friend who had his email and was an 18-year-old kid who said, like, hey, I want to do these documentaries. And he was like, you seem very fired up. I don't know what we can promise you, but he put me in touch with the team manager there. I ended up getting sponsored, and they've been my sponsor now for, going on 15 years.
Wow.
Relationship, and still get to travel for part of the year and have really been able to do a lot. I go on the surf trip, we test the products with other athletes, and then I am kind of the guy that will write a story about the trip, which is what I wanted to do from an early age. And it's just a wonderful blessing given how the economics of journalism have just become gutted. You know, it's so hard to be a freelance journalist. I've been able to pursue that skill set of journalism through this brand Patagonia. And if anyone has their winter catalog right now that just got mailed out to, you know, a few 100,000 people, there's a story that I wrote in it about going to this remote place in Canada with a number of other athletes. It's a pretty fun story. So yeah, that was how I got. That was a long answer, but it's a way to exercise. Moving and athleticism is a way to move my body and my mind.
Nice. I love how you just, basically created the career. You manifested what you wanted out of your life as a teenager, which is pretty incredible. I know as a teen, a lot of folks don't have a good sense on, hey, what am I going to be in 5 years or 10 years? And you seem to have a really good vision and sense of that. How did that kind of cut? It just was like, these are the things you're interested in. You shot your shot with the email to the Patagonia founder and it just kind of worked out from there? Or was there something else kind of driving that career, essentially?
I had an insight when I was maybe 14, freshman in high school. All my close friends were obsessed with getting sponsored by surf companies around that time. You know, if you can get a hat or if you can get a backpack, it's like the coolest thing, right? It was so much about who could get sponsored and the company's giving you the free shoes. And I remember looking at like all my friends who were good surfers and they're just decked out in all these logos. And I had this thought like, these companies aren't just giving us this stuff to be nice. Like they're getting something out of this too. And it was a very I remember the moment, like being at school, seeing all my friends in these logos and being like, I don't think this is just like an act of generosity. They actually need us. Like, without people representing the values of a brand is just a hollow idea. You know, it's animated and created by the people that represent it. So what do I want to represent? And is there a way to align my interests with a company's interest and have that work out for both of us? So, I mean, I remember sitting down with my mom and coming up with a whiteboard list of potential brands that I could approach to do this travel surf journalism thing. And Patagonia at that time was really only just a few years into surfing. They'd been working with a well-known group of pro surfer brothers named the Malloys that were really crafting this new kind of surf marketing that had not really been popular around that time, which was like, it's all about the adventure. It's all about like taking the values of just getting to these far-flung, crazy places and testing the gear in hard environments. You know, around that time, what was popular was like, you know, the Quicksilver Young Guns, where they're on these like super yachts and it's like a 5-star hotel and very like bling-oriented surf culture. And I was just like, all that stuff's super lame. I want to go on badass adventures to far-flung places and, you know, discover waves. And also, you know, if you're a surfer, you kind of ultimately become an environmentalist because you're on the front lines of so many of these ocean issues, you know, as are, you know, people who are swim runners, right? You see the plastic cups, you see the sewage, and it just becomes very apparent that things we're doing upstream are impacting animals and humans. So, you know, that kind of environmental ethic was very logical for me and instilled at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. As you were saying that, I was thinking, the bones of Swimrun are the same in that respect. Is you're going off to these kind of far from places. The races are super challenging. People that seek Swimrun are usually not seeking like Ironman type experiences. They're looking for something different. Sometimes even within themselves, they're looking for that challenge. They're looking for something that's kind of maybe scares them shitless going into it, and then they come out the other side, hopefully a better person. I'm curious, given all this background, where did Swimrun kind of pop up for you and kind of like just bring us to sort of almost like the recent past when you reached out before, I guess, or once you've signed up for Catalina?
I heard about Swimrun through Adam Skolnick, who's a great friend of mine, good swimmer. We do a lot of ocean swims in LA together. He was the one who told me about it. It didn't take much convincing to, it's right up my alley, right? It's like, let's do hard shit in beautiful places. Like, sign me up. Up until that point had not done many endurance sports. Most of my, like, I'll put it this way, there weren't many sports that I'd ever done where you're eating while doing the sport. It sounds weird, but like before you get into endurance sports, like the idea that you'd be eating something while exercising is like, I remember feeling like that's weird. Like, no, you eat after the surf session. You know, you do the hard, you know, I would do HIIT workouts, and I'd done CrossFit in the past, which, you know, 45 to an hour of just good core training, but not that real like long, okay, we're going to be doing something for a few hours here. So that was new to me. But I you know, I liked the idea of it and have since kind of really fallen in love with endurance sports. You know, after the swim run, I very quickly signed up for my first ultra at Burning Man, which was, you know, an order of magnitude harder than my first swim run, you know, just because I did the short one just to try it out. And that was, I mean, I feel like that I really got what you guys are addicted to by doing the Burning Man run, because, you know, I mean, it's such an altered state at that point, you know, when you're 4 hours in and, you know, seeing the face of God. So I'm looking forward to more of it in 2026.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, you had a great race. You know, I'm not patting myself on the back for gearing you up or anything like that, but you certainly showed up and represented well for pro surfers at swimrun events.
Yeah, well, it was a good time, and yeah, I got to do it on Catalina, which I had been to a number of other times on spearfishing trips. So yeah, I go out there quite often to go lobster dive or go shoot some fish. There's a really good spearfishing community in LA and around Catalina. So I remember it was a very calm day. The water was real clear. So I remember swimming and seeing a bunch of fish on a few of those swims and be like, man, I wish I had my gun right now.
Come back here.
Come back
Next
here.
weekend,
Yeah, this is a good little zone. But yeah, I mean, very interested and totally amped to do more swim runs. And, you know, we did our podcast, Chris, on my show, and actually had a couple listeners sign up for the Orcas swim run as a result of our conversation. So it is a virus that is spreading.
We're here to help.
Yeah.
Well, the only cure to that virus.
You guys are
is
super
more-
spreaders.
Yes, more cowbell, more swim runs. It's the only cure. Nice. And you mentioned a podcast. I know, Chris, you were on there as well. How did that come about for you, Kyle? And kind of what are you focusing on your podcast and chatting about in your conversations on the couch?
Yeah, I started podcasting because I was starting to surf Mavericks and had been for a few years. Big wave surfing is kind of like a swim run community. It's like a very niche subculture within surfing. If you're really into big wave surfing, you know, there's half a dozen spots around the world that everyone goes year after year. And in Santa Cruz, one of those waves called Mavericks is about an hour north of where we live. Santa Cruz
so for folks that don't know, that's Half Moon Bay area, which is south of San Francisco, on the coast, on Pacific coast. It's a lovely area. But when Mavericks comes in, it's like everyone descends on it, right? It's like you don't get a lot of notice. It's like, hey, the waves are coming, everyone show up, and everyone just kind of flies in for it or drives up for it.
You generally get about a week's notice for swells. You can see them 2 weeks out. Closer you get to the actual day, the more real that data is becoming. You know, you see these big magenta blobs out in the middle of the ocean, and surfers, you know, when you get to a certain level, you do become literate in meteorology, because that is how you're going to be able to show up at the spot for the day. And there are a few spots that, because of the way the bottom of the ocean is shaped, they just hold way bigger waves than anywhere else. You know, I mean, Santa Cruz has a ton of really good waves. Nowhere's like Mavericks along the California coast. It just magnifies swells to 60-foot waves that are breaking more or less in the same spot every single time, which is a very unique characteristic of that wave when compared to a wave like Nazare, which is, you know, it's a very hyped wave. You can tow into that wave, but there's waves breaking all over the place. You can't just like sit in position and paddle yourself into a wave that size, which is very unique about Mavericks. It's a wave that draws surfers from South Africa, Morocco, Hawaii, Mexico. When that wave is on, it's like, rainbow colored flag of, the amount of international surfers that are coming in. So, as a local growing up in town, it was just super fun to meet all these guys that I looked up to. And, after a big session, it's a kind of surfing where there's a ton of camaraderie, because while there is a competitive edge to it, it's the most dangerous form of surfing. It's like the combat division of the sport of surfing. So we'd all come into the spot called the Old Princeton Landing Bar, and everyone would be getting beers and hugs and high fives. And then I thought, man, this is like, it's pretty interesting that this is where we're talking about what it was actually like to be out there. What were people thinking of? What were the wipeouts? What were the heroic rides? And how often it is that mainstream media just gets big wave surfing so wrong. And it just turns out it's so cheesy, it's just, they get it very wrong of like the actual vibe of it. And I had been listening to podcasts pretty consistently at that time. I was listening to a lot of Tim Ferriss and Rogan, those earlier Rich Roll, earlier podcasts, and thought, well, I could just buy some gear for a few $100 and sit down with these guys who I respect and are friendly to me, and we could do this kind of, peer journalism, talk about the sessions, talk about the careers. And I remember, man, from one of the earliest episodes I did, I was just hooked. It was one of the earliest episodes with a guy named Sean Dollar, who held the Guinness record of big waves to that point. He had recently had a head injury and was dealing with the trauma of that. And as you know, podcasting just gives people a platform to speak about who they are and what they're really all about. You don't need to flatten yourself into these little sound bites. And I just loved it. I loved that experience, the long form nature of it. I loved reaching out to these people, interviewing them. And then from that narrow focus of big wave surfing, I realized, well, I can actually divert out of this to just interview anyone who will talk to me and use it as this vehicle to explore the world, which is how I got into it. And that was 8 years ago, 400 something episodes later.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's a super popular podcast. I mean, I know when I was on it, I sent it to sort of my core group of friends, and a couple of them were like, "Oh man, now you've actually been on a real podcast now," kind of thing. So it was like, I was like, "Shit, well, I'll take it. I'll take it." But that podcast, I mean, you're obviously a great interviewer. You're a great communicator. You really can draw out like really interesting conversations. Like that led to you writing a book, which I have it right here. So this came out a couple months ago, I believe.
About a month
last
ago,
question.
Yeah, we're
One
month
last question
in.
before you go, which is interesting. The idea of the book is why you should interview your parents, and it's sort of quasi memoir, quasi kind of like how to. In the book, you educate people on what gear they need to start a podcast. Now, obviously, this is something you've taken seriously if you're writing a book about it. But can you give us a little bit of the history of how the book came about and why you decided that you wanted to write it?
The book is really about how to ask better questions to anyone. And I learned how to ask questions by starting a podcast, and it's led to so much good in my life. But most people don't learn how to ask questions. From an early age, we're not rewarded for asking questions. We're rewarded for having the right answer on the test, not the right question. The smartest person in the office seems very sure of themselves. They're not the ones that are asking great questions. And as a result, it creates much smaller lives than we need to have. And it's a skill that's quite easy to learn if you just try. And I thought, man, if there's some way that this idea could fundamentally, help people become better question askers with this skill that I had developed from podcasting, I would love to do that. I had done a podcast with my dad, who's this charismatic old documentary filmmaker, and he told a bunch of stories on the show, and afterwards I received emails from a lot of listeners who were like, that was awesome. I want to learn how to interview my parents. How do I do that? So that was the first signal boost that, okay, maybe there's a book in this. That was when I first got the idea for this book. And that led to this other kind of aha moment, which was, okay, people don't know how to ask questions in culture. Isn't that weird? And people don't actually know how to ask their parents questions in particular. Like, we're obsessed with self-discovery, yet we have these kind of maps to ourselves standing in front of us who are our parents, our parents' stories, how they see the world, and the events that have impacted them do trickle down to us in some way. And how often is it that people have a mom or dad who dies, and then at the funeral, a friend comes up and said, "Oh, I knew your dad when he was 25. We, sailed to South Africa together." And you think, "I never knew my dad went to South Africa." Like, there are these mysteries that go unsolved so often. And I've actually learned since writing the book that a big form of grief for a lot of people is that aha moment that they have once the parent dies, which is, holy shit, I never asked these questions and I don't know who they are. And now it's all gonna, die with mysteries. Since then, I decided, well, I think this could be really worth my time. There's a skill I can teach people. There's the emotional hook of, everyone can interview their parents. It's not that hard. And it can lead to really profound results. It can help you feel closer to them. It can help you maybe be a little easier on them. A lot of us move out when we're 18. And, the stat is by the time you're 18, you've already spent roughly 90% of your total time on Earth with your parents. So after 18, you've got about 10% left, but you have all these old stories that you're carrying around. And often we can just be very hard on our parents. So how many of us need to update the stories of our parents? How many of us could potentially see them with more empathy and see them as people by doing these interviews and learning the stories of their lives? So that was what I set out to do the book with, that as the hope. And 3 years later and thousands of writing sessions and edits, we ended up with this book, One Last Question Before You Go.
Yeah, it's a great book. And honestly, it's really, not to get super emotional or anything, but, my dad, he's pretty old. He's had dementia. And I've actually used this book a lot, just trying to ask probing questions, just to kind of he has very little short-term memory, but he'll sort of wax philosophical about freaking Bialy he had in 1962 in New York City, where he used to live. And, I've used this book as a way of kind of like priming myself to be like, oh yeah, let's explore this random core memory that's popping up. I see him every weekend, and I'll just try to just pull on these strings. So, it isn't like podcast form or anything like that. But, if he starts pulling on like an old memory, I'll start trying to paint, well, what was the weather like that day? What was, give me let's add a little patina to this black and white image kind of thing. And it's been really rewarding for me as someone who knows, my dad's sort of in like the last chapter of his life yeah, I mean, just kind of get a little bit more, or even if it's less for me, but give him more of an opportunity to probe his own mind and his own memories and kind of fill those out a little bit better.
Yeah, I have been hearing from a lot of people that they're not actually using the book to do formal interviews, but just ask better questions around the dinner table. I made the decision fairly late in the writing process to have all the chapters in the book be questions that you can ask your parents. So a lot of people I find are using the book as an excuse to start these conversations. There are a number of materials out there before my book that are just questions that you can ask your parents. While I think that's a good start, one thing that I really emphasize in my book is that the real good stuff isn't going to come likely from that first question. It's going to come from a follow-up question. Like what we're doing here, right? You're paying attention to your parent. You ask them one question, and then you ask a follow-up question that's related. And typically you want that follow-up question to be something around feeling. There was an author that I interviewed for the book named Charles Duhigg, who wrote first a book called The Power of Habit, and then later one called Super Communicators. And he has this concept called deep questions, where you don't want to ask people only about the facts of their lives. You want to ask them about the feelings of their lives. So how did it feel to sail to South Africa? What made you want to do that? Like, yeah, we could get around, oh, how many miles did you sail? Sure, but the interesting stuff, the stuff that really animates who we are, is the feeling of it. And I find that oftentimes, where people have issues with their parents, is around the facts, right? It's like you believe a different thing that I believe about the world. You're, a Republican, I'm a Democrat, yada, yada, whatever. But if you get in the feelings of like, wow, that seemed really scary. What did that feel like for you? All of a sudden, it takes away the content and you're getting into the context of people's lives, which allows for a lot more relatability.
Nice. Yeah, getting in there is, definitely not easy, and it's certainly not a skill. As you mentioned at the start, it's like, hey, Chris and I both have small kids, and almost when they're talking, it's like, stop asking so many questions, like stop asking so many questions, sort of thing. So I really see how it's almost sort of stunted at an early age, and it's less about how do we keep these kids, or how do we grow very curious kids, which is kind of
Right.
where it comes from. Of, hey, why are you doing things that way, or why this, or to your point, how are the kind of the feelings during these times? And yeah, I like that. I see how it's really valuable to kind of get that other perspective of your parent. And certainly as you're maturing as an adult, it's like, hey, being in your 30s or your 40s or whatever has its own challenges, plus parenting. You're kind of getting a little bit of a different side of, hey, my parents didn't have it easy, or they were navigating these things as well. And yeah, I certainly would gain a lot more empathy.
Yeah. I mean, when our parents were growing up, sunscreen didn't exist. Like, it was such a different world. And so it's no wonder that we can't relate, culturally to someone who's in their 80s now. But, these ideas aren't new. A very popular book is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's basically how to ask people questions about themselves, and they will love you for it.
Yeah, and I think it's like, Chipper, to what you were saying is I was a very kind of like you, Kyle, I was an extremely hyperactive kid and played all the sports.
Yeah.
And now that my son is kind of like gotten those genes, I see my parents with a lot more empathy, and I've apologized to them on multiple occasions. It's like, now I get it. Now I get what you guys had to go through. I think you mentioned it earlier, but this idea of by asking good questions, and especially the ones that are like, the question that you feel like you shouldn't ask is probably the one you should ask, like the one that's gonna like kind of be like, "Eeh," that's probably where you want to go, and that should be your guide. It also allows you, as you mentioned earlier, to kind of revisit some of these memories, these core memories that you have, where it's like, oh, my dad was like whatever. Like you, as an adult, you can look back and recast that memory with a lot more empathy, and that really only happens if you're curious around who was the person who was making that decision or who took that action at that moment.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot, just as we're in New Year, about the value of reflecting and how it's really becoming kind of a lost art. Like the way that we consume information now is through a kind of informational grazing, where we're just constantly looking for this new information. We're grazing about, we're not actually digesting it and allowing that information to guide us in any new or substantial way. And it's something that it's a habit I'm trying to break. I just read for the first time a really great book called The Wave by Susan Casey. So much good info in there. I highlighted all this stuff, and I'm now forcing myself to write that highlighted text out in another document so I'll actually digest it. Similarly, when I found journalism, when I found travel journalism, the reason I got addicted to it was because I got to go on the trip again once I was home. You get to craft a narrative around all these seemingly random experiences and weave a bit of a tale about it. If you're going to do a big endurance race, how can you tell a story about it afterwards? What are those details that you're going to want to remember so you're not just on to the next, the next, the next? And the same goes for our parents, right? We had our childhood, we moved out, these are the parents, we're always just thinking forward until they die. And there's this flipping back and getting curious about the past, about what just happened, that is a real skill. And it's a subtle and almost like silent skill that I find that the people that I respect the most all have developed. Like they all have figured out a way to metabolize what's happening to them in life and then use that new information to make future decisions. but you need to carve out the time to do it. And I think that interviewing your parents, or even just in a car ride, learning to ask them a couple questions about their history, what it was like for them in their 20s or 30s, is a way to flex that muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, real funny story. So my daughter, who's 9, saw a picture of my mom from the 60s when she had a big old beehive hairdo kind of thing.
I could
And
see that. Yeah, your mom
my
definitely
daughter's
could
like,
rock that thing.
how, she was just like, how is that possible? How does
Yeah.
this happen? So there's this really funny memory, it might be a core memory for my daughter, who knows, but of my mom basically like teaching her how to do a beehive hairdo, which is just a super funny kind of like holiday experience that we just had a few weeks ago, which was pretty crazy. Once it was all done, no photographic evidence, according to my
Mm.
mom. She forbade it. I was even trying. We like reached around the corner with the phone, and she was like, "Get that out of here." It's like no one can see this. But yeah, I mean, there's so many experiences like that. And to your point, Kyle, I find that one of the things I've loved about our podcast is the fact that pretty much contemporaneous or immediately after an event, we're recording a podcast, a race report about the experience. We'll have periods like, we're going to do the World Championship again in September. We're certainly going to listen to those old race reports. And it's kind of like
Mhm.
transports you back. It gives you so much context. It gives you so much gratitude. I mean, whenever I listen to all those old race reports, I'm just like filled with love for Chipper, love for the sport. And it really, to your point, kind of takes you back to that experience, and you're able to really internalize it in a way of like, okay, well, what am I going to do different? How did I grow from this experience, not just from immediately afterwards, but now a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later?
I interviewed Kai Lenny on my show once, who's this phenom big wave surfer. He's the best big wave surfer in the world right now. It wins all the contests, can ride any watercraft incredibly well. He said he keeps a journal and will journal after his big wave sessions about the equipment, about what went well, what didn't go well. And I mean, he's at the highest level. This isn't just some, kind of cool, nice thing, just keep it journal. It's like if you want to be at the highest level as an athlete, reflection is necessary so that you're not repeating bad habits again and again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the podcast essentially is like the audio journal of it, essentially, is how we're kind of treating it to that extent. And yeah, I mean, I think journaling and documenting and kind of reflecting is becoming more mainstream, if we want to say that. And certainly, I think a lot of people are seeing the benefits of it throughout. So it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys also keep journals when you're thinking about new races that you're doing? How do you actually incorporate the learning that you have from one race to another?
I think
That is
because Chipper and I do so many of our races together, it's kind of like it's a little bit of a hive mind. We kind of call it the psychic tether, where there are experiences that I'll
You
want
are
to
from
key in on.
California. You are in California.
It's true. It's true. There are experiences that Chipper keys in on, and then we kind of use that information usually before a race to kind of figure it out. At this point, we've done so many races that, even if it's a first year race or a new event, we kind of have our sea legs about, okay, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? What are the features of this race that we're going to index on and make sure we train for? Swim run, I think similar to surfing, each break is different. Even within a break, it'll be different depending on weather conditions and stuff. So, there's a race that this year is going to be the 10th edition of this race in Maine called Casco Bay, which is just an awesome swim run. Highly recommended, Kyle. Just throwing that out there. Island to island, super fun. Every year is different. Every year the conditions can be different, swells can be different, currents, tides can be different. So even though it's a course that we're super familiar with, like we always come to it with like a fresh pair of eyes. We always do our due diligence before the race, where
Yeah.
we'll listen to our race report. We'll see if there's any sort of change in conditions. We'll, the night before on the flight out or whatever, we'll kind of go through the course map and kind of decide on what we're going to do, when and where, and, have our plan A's or our plan B's. And while that sounds like very technical, it ends up being like much more fluid and just kind of like, like I don't write stuff on my paddles. Chipper writes stuff on his paddles. If the stuff washes off his paddles, we're like, oh, whatever, it's fine. I'll have the islands memorized. Chipper will be like, what island are we on? I'll be like, we're on this island. It's like, it's interesting how, because it's this kind of hive mind thing, I think it allows us to almost in real time, not just like iterate during the race, but when we reflect afterwards, sometimes we won't even try to communicate. Like we won't give ourselves like our mini race report right after. We'll just kind of like hold it to process it a little bit. So then when we come together, we'll actually have like a better conversation about it.
Yeah.
And kind of like check each other's exam on the race, so to speak.
And I mean, obviously, we're very fortunate. I mean, we're interacting a lot during the week as well. So, hey, we'll have a race, we'll kind of debrief and like, hey, we want to try these 5 things, or we want to kind of adjust in this way. And I feel like every time, hey, we might be just on a, long run together and we're kind of throwing out, hey, let's try, what do you think about doing this? And we're kind of like workshopping this as a team, essentially, on some of our, as we're logging more miles together, which we've logged thousands and thousands at this point. But yeah, I mean, obviously not everybody has that sort of luxury, but I think journaling or other documentation certainly would be helpful to get your thoughts out and see where you can improve and kind of work things up and to the right.
You're reminding me of this time that I was on the North Shore of Oahu. I was there with a group of people I was working with. My career is in advertising. Generally, I now work with a number of brands and help them craft campaigns and stuff. But I was out there with this company called Mudwater, and the whole team was out there. A few of the guys were surfers. One is a creative director he's a decent surfer, but the waves were big. North Shore is one of those places where the water just hits you harder there. We paddled out together. He was a little nervous. We're out for maybe a half an hour playing cat and mouse with these pretty big waves, and this huge set comes out. Boom, it just explodes him, breaks his leash, board gone, gets tumbled through the whitewater, ends up crawling up the beach, and I go in to make sure he's okay, and he's like, dude, oh my God, I almost died. That was so scary. And I said, be very careful of the narrative that you're telling right now. Because if the narrative you're spinning is, I almost just died, you're going to be super scared in big waves forever, because that story is going to replay in your brain again and again. If you alternatively say, I just made it through some big waves and I'm totally fine now, you can use that experience as evidence that you could go do that again.
Yep.
And in the book, I interview an expert in memory. And he said, one of the primary reasons humans have memory is that it gives us evidence for how we should act in the future. So if you have a story, an experience of being heroic in the past, this is CPR, for example, right? You're not just memorizing the skill of CPR, you're internalizing a story that you're a kind of person who can act in an extreme situation, in an emergency. You're the kind of person who does act in an emergency. And that self-narrative is telling you how you should do things in the future. So he said, when you're interviewing your parents, notice what stories they're telling, because that will tell you how they see themselves. Do they see themselves as a hero, as a victim, as a helper? These are the memories that ultimately endure in us, and they say way more than just the story. It's also a reason why doing swim runs is just such a healthy, good thing for people, not just physically, but as I'm sure you guys can attest to, it changes the way people see themselves. And part of that is because they now have memories that they can do this really hard thing, and that is transferable well beyond sports and into life.
Absolutely. And I think to that point, the story that we always try to have swim runners tell themselves is like, lean into the adventure side of it, lean into the wildness of it. Like, yeah, do your training so the swims aren't ordeals. And that's the same advice I told you, Kyle, was like, just make sure your swimming's on point and then the rest you can handle, which obviously wasn't a problem for you because you had an awesome race. But yeah, like insofar as you can lean into sort of the wildness and the level of difficulty rather than being scared of it, you're more likely to come out the other side, again, becoming the hero of your own story rather than the victim of your own story, which is, not where you want to be.
Yeah. And the community really kind of supports that as well. We've done triathlons and all this sort of stuff. It's like, hey, similar to your surfing Mavericks there with the group of people that will go to the bar after. It's not like, oh, what was your time on this run or how did the swim go? It's like, oh man, remember this really cool area that you had to go through the swamp and then over that log, and it's kind of like more recalling the adventure versus like how fast or whatever you did it.
Yeah.
So it does. There's a lot of hive mind sort of reinforcement almost after the fact of these swim runs, because we always try to hang out as long as we can. If anyone talks swim with us,
Chipper,
we'll
that
take it.
actually reminds me when we did Casco Bay, after we started the show, we decided to throw a post-race party, which
Yeah.
no one had really done. And we were pretty sure that at least like 3 people were going to show up, including the 2 of us, but a bunch of people showed up. And what became pretty apparent is there wasn't a space for people to share the war stories and kind of commiserate on the journey and the adventure. And we created a space for that and convened that. And I thought it was just super fun. To your point, Kyle, after a huge wave set, everyone's just like, oh my God, that was crazy. It was the same thing. And I felt like that really cemented sort of for us, the reason for even having the show was to give people an outlet to not just hear our stories from our personal swimrun journey, but also share other people's stories so we can sort of create this virtual kind of space to get people stoked on it.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that certain cultures value auditory storytelling more than others? Like, I don't know if you've ever been to Ireland, but man, like those people can wax philosophical about some pretty mundane shit. And it's just like, it's part of the way they grow up. You're just like, damn, you guys are storytellers. You're weaving this lore in the way that you're speaking. People from the South as well grew up in a culture of storytellers. In other cultures that are maybe a bit more muted, it's just not as common to tell stories. If you want to recount something that just happened, you're able to just pull out your phone and say, well, look at this photo I took of it. Look at this video. And one thing I'm trying to get better at, and it's partly why I'm a writer, is just like, okay, well, what if I had to describe that moment to someone? How would I do that? And actually train yourself, just as you can train yourself to ask better questions, train yourself to try and weave a bit of a tale about something that just happened, because that is ultimately what endures. Memories, stories are what we'll remember forever. It's not just the facts. And pretty often, it's been interesting having written this book, how many stories of the outdoors are what endure. There's something about the novelty of being outdoors, engaging your 5 senses that really endures more than just like that Tuesday you spent on your computer. Even if something crazy happened on the computer, like it really etches itself into our long-term memory in a more durable way. So, it's another sell for Swimrun.
I like that.
The only
All
thing
the
you'll
senses are
remember
activated outside.
the only thing you'll remember 60 years from now, Swimrun.
So I've heard you say that before. And for me, it's part of like, well, to me, it almost seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's like, you spent a lot of time outdoors. Chipper and I also spent a lot of time outdoors. I think there's also just like way much larger panel to choose from because we spend so much time outdoors, which, if you don't spend a lot of time outdoors, highly encourage it. You should go outside more. It's great. You'll love it. It's good for you. But yeah, it's almost like it becomes this thing that sort of self-perpetuates. Like you spend time outdoors, you have these great experiences, we get to travel. I've been telling folks lately, we've been to Sweden 4 of the last 5 years for this race. Like, who would have thought, not me, not Chipper, that we'd spend all this time in Sweden. And it's been amazing, right? But it's the type of thing where it's like, if you want to make good memories, if you want to make core memories, and similar to your parents, if you want to sort of interrogate and question and recast some of the core memories you have about them or with them, like do it on a walk, do it on a drive. Don't just do it at the kitchen table necessarily, even though that's better than nothing.
There's a book from a guy I had on my podcast named Derek Sivers, very smart guy, and the book is called Useful Not True. Short book, and it's about things that are useful but not true. And it's useful for me to believe that the things I'll remember 50 years from now are outdoors experiences. Whether or not that's true, I don't care.
Yes.
Like there are a number of ways that you can go through life. You're like, that probably isn't true, or maybe it's not true, but it's really useful for me to believe and kind of show up with that belief. Like one of them that he has is men and women are the same. And he's like, that's not true. But if I just like show up to meet a woman, like to almost overcorrect for maybe sexist tendencies that I have, I'm going to be like, we're the same. And like, yeah, that's not true, but it might lead to a better conversation in that interaction. You can have certain useful but not true beliefs about, God, talk about athletes, believing like I'm the baddest motherfucker in the world, like it's a very useful belief to have at the starting line. Might not be true, but you should really internalize that story.
Yeah. Definitely gear. I know is like, oh, this carbon fiber, whatever part on my bike is going to really, really help me.
Yeah, the 5 grams you're going to save in weight is going to make all the difference. Meanwhile, you probably should have just taken a nice healthy poop that was going to,
exactly.
save you those.
Yeah.
This lion's mane gives me the edge, man. I can feel it.
Yes, these. I like. Yeah, that's certainly true. Kyle, I really like this building empathy for your parents and that sort of thing. I wonder how I can take some of this stuff and apply it to my own kids and try to have them be more curious. When we're in the car talking about like, oh, I've seen this person in concert, and then my kids start kind of like, oh, when were you doing it? Who were you with? And they kind of do that. I wonder how we can try to coach up the younger generation to have more curiosity and asking more deeper questions.
Part of it comes down to having a list of weird questions that you make a habit of asking your kids. It's hard to come up with it in the moment. We don't want to come across as weird in any new interaction with someone. Hey, what do you do for work? Oh, weather's great, huh? But conversations get so much more exciting if we say, like, what's the craziest concert you've ever been to? Or what's the weirdest costume you ever worn? Just whatever. You can have a bunch of weird ones at your disposal. And I think that, I mentioned costumes, but like, we're all wearing costumes at any one point, even if it's just our suit and tie, right? That's a costume. Or if you're wearing athletic gear, that's a costume.
Yeah, suit and tie is a clown suit.
It is.
Yeah.
And one thing I like about costume parties is it gives people permission to take on a new identity, an alter ego if they want. And I think that playing the guy who asks weird questions all the time is a really good kind of alter ego to practice every now and again. And just get comfortable by being like, I'm going to ask this weird question right now. This feels kind of off the wall and strange, but I'm going to make a habit of it. You can have 10 or 20 questions on your phone and just make a habit of being like, all right, guys, let's do the question game. And you throw one out. But I think that gives kids permission to also just start, we stop asking questions because we don't want to feel weird. Right? And it just feels kind of like that's kind of hard or uncomfortable, even if we are curious about it. So giving yourself permission is such a massive first step to this whole thing.
Yeah. And maybe on the flip side as well, like not sort of shooting down any kind of weird questions from your kids. Like if your kids ask you something like just totally bizarre, just take that question seriously and answer it the best you can, and just kind of like go from there.
There's actually a lot of science around how little kids will ask these insane amounts of questions, and then that drops off in elementary school, largely because it's not nurtured. But in the book, One Last Question Before You Go, part of it is about how humans are actually the only animals that we know of that can ask questions. Like we can make requests, not just for things, but for information. So as far as we know, it's a unique characteristic of Homo sapiens. And it's partly what has allowed us to become so successful is that we can create imagined realities and have this knowledge that we don't know something. Like we know that we don't know. And that's what a question is, like this desire for information that we understand conceptually is out there, but don't have yet. Other animals, as far as we know, can't do that.
I'm actually reading a book right now called Nexus by Harari's the guy's last name. He wrote Sapiens, and it's all about like the thing that defines us as a species. It's information, our ability to share it, collect it, and kind of transfer it on. Yeah, so that totally tracks. One last question before you go. We've had you on for a while. We really appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you very much, Shipper. The book's available now. You can get it on Amazon or request it from your local bookstore. Highly recommend it. It's also a pretty cool audiobook because it's different than just reading the book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you decided to do the audiobook like a little bit different and make it a little bit more dynamic?
This is a shout out to Adam Skolnick, who, for people who don't know, is a very talented writer. He was the ghostwriter on the wildly successful David Goggins book, Can't Hurt Me. And in their audiobook, between chapters, Adam and David do mini podcasts where they reflect on the chapter. They say, oh, wow, what was that like? Being in the army. And David's telling more stories that didn't make it into the book. And I just love listening to that audiobook. It just adds a level of dynamism that I don't think you get from normal audiobooks, because you're kind of mashing up these two mediums of extemporaneous podcasting and really thoughtful, words on page speaking. So I was lucky in that a lot of the people in my book I recorded interviews with. Some of them were on my podcast, and others I just decided to record it high quality. So Adam gave me the idea that between certain chapters, I could include some of their voices in these little mini 3 to 5 minute bite-sized interviews. And people love it. I mean, it's been very well received so far. A lot of people's favorite aspects of it is that you hear these voices, so you can get into, I think it gives you another level of understanding for who the characters are. These mediums are changing so fast. Audiobooks, podcasting, books, like you don't need to do it a certain way. You can blend all these mediums in new and different ways. Just because not many people have done it doesn't mean you can't. So yeah, you can get one last question before you go on Audible, and you'll hear me read the audiobook as well as hear short snippets with a number of experts in parent-child relationships, question asking, parents in prehistory, memory, my own parents. It's an entertaining, fun story as well. It's not just eating your vegetables. I think you'll get taken on a bit of a tale with the book. So yeah, people seem to be enjoying it, and really appreciate anyone who is buying it and supporting it.
Nice. Cool. When's second? This is actually the last question. When's the next swim run you have coming up?
Next swim run. I think there's going to be some waves this weekend, so I'm going to be running into the surf soon. Stay in touch. I want to do more of these things. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but I'm on a store tour right now with my book. So I'm going to be in Austin, Texas on January 8th. I'm going to be in Portland, Oregon on January 22nd. And I'm going to be in New York on February 21st. You can go to my Instagram to check out all those dates. They're all at Patagonia stores, where I'll be doing live readings, signing books, answering questions. We just finished the California tour. It was a ton of fun, and now we're spreading out, taking the nation by storm. So if anyone out there is in any of those cities, would love to see you in person.
Love it. Fun fact, Patagonia is Chipper's favorite store.
Yeah, that is true.
Chipper's going to become a roadie. You're going to become a roadie on the tour.
I need anyone to drive the van, Kyle.
God, I just keep seeing this guy.
You have a VW wagon probably, or a Westfalia.
Yes.
Yeah, I can drive it if you need.
Too funny. All right, Kyle, man, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you. Best of luck with the book. We'll make sure to add the links and everything in the show notes for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, have a great year. Maybe we'll see you at Orcas later this year. It's an awesome race. Highly recommend.
Thank you so much. Yeah, love the show. Thanks for all you're doing.
I appreciate you, man.
Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating or review, since that's the best way to help other people discover the show and the sport of swim run.
Check out our website, lowtideboys.com. That's boys with a Z, for swim run resources, including gear guides, tips, how-to videos, and so much more. Make sure to check out our meme page at The Löw Tide Böyz on Instagram. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, send us a DM or email us at lowtideboys@gmail.com.
We'd like to thank Writing Easy Records for our show music, and of course our wives for their support and tolerance of our swim run and other activities.
Finally, you can support our efforts on Patreon. Until next time, get out there and go for a swim.
Then a run,
And then a swim,
then another run,
then another swim.
then run some more.
Just keep going.
Let's go.
And then stop at some point because,
And fuel. Don't forget to fuel.
Gotta